Okay, greetings and welcome. You found me. I'm Drew, and I'm reading books. And we are almost to the end of Perloo the Bold. Okay, we're on chapter 20 now. And I think one of the first voices I found on this one was Berwig's. So, because this chapter is Berwig the Granter. So, let's see what Berwig does next. He's a big bunny. Okay, let's do this. Chapter 20. Do I look powerful? Berwig asked, straining to see a reflection of himself in a small, paw-held mica mirror. Am I too ferocious? He and Cineas were just outside the great hall in the central tribe burrow. Berwig was wearing his best golden wolf fur smock. His whiskers had been brushed to brilliance. His ear tips had been beeswaxed to barbed points, and his round cheeks glowed with buffalo grease. Not far from them stood a troop of 20 monomer warriors. Each wore wooden armor. Pikes tipped with thorns were in their paws. May I humbly urge you to straighten your smock? Cineas said. He was holding Jolene's written proclamation. Though annoyed, Berwig did as told, then stole a scratch. And if, Granter, you could keep from scratching, Cineas added, it would add to your grandeur. Stop telling me what to do, Berwig snapped. You seem to be forgetting that I'm Granter. Cineas abased himself with a low bow. Sorry. Of course it is you who are Granter, he whispered through clenched teeth. How could I ever forget that? May I offer you the proclamation? Berwick snatched it from Cineas's paws. Gently, Cineas shrieked. It's fragile. I worked very hard. Never mind your work. Let's get on with mine, Berwick growled. Cineas took a deep breath to calm himself. If I may be so bold, Granter, when you read from the proclamation, try to keep your paws from trembling. May the effort to look like a Granter. Are you suggesting I'm not one? Berwick said. I'm suggesting nothing, Cineas said with an other low bow that concealed a smirk. I assure you, Granter, all you need to do is show yourself on the field of battle, and the Felbarts will race away. You are, Granter, perfectly savage in your appearance. And I promise, Cineas continued, when you return from the war, I, who, alas, must stay behind, will arrange a great triumph. Berwig, saying nothing, only stole another look in the mirror and adjusted a whisker strand. Cineas offered Berwig another leaf of bark. Here is the speech I wrote for you, he said. Berwig flung it aside. I can give my own speeches, thank you, and they're a lot better than yours. Muttering venomous oaths under his breath, Cineas approached the warriors. A burly fellow with scarred face and ears was the commander. March them in, Cineas snapped. The commander pulled a ragged ear, turned to his troops, and shouted, Start beating now! The warriors lifted their pikes and smote them against their wooden armor in unison. The result was a sharp rhythmic clack, which, when made by all the soldiers and repeated steadily, reverberated through the halls. Begin to go forward. Hop, the commander called. Beating their pikes, the warriors began to hop up and down the place, as they did in alternate rows, so that while half jumped and the other half held their ground until the first half landed, then the second half jumped while the first half paused. Up and down they went, creating a wave-like effect. At a predetermined count, they all began to hop forward into the great hall. Berwig, all but tripping on his smock, excuse me, trying to keep from scratching himself, moved to the rear of his troops. As the last row moved forward, he hopped along with them. Cineas entered the great hall but kept himself apart. The hall was packed with monomers straining and gawking to see the warriors. As the soldiers entered the hall, Gumpel, hidden midst the crowd, shouted, "Hurrah for our warriors!" None of the monomers took up the cry, but when Gumpel altered her words to "Hurrah for monomers," the cheer was taken up by a few, and then in a listless tone by the whole crowd. Following the bald orders of their commander, the warriors split into two equal sections, one to each side of the Settop. There, with a final clack, they stopped. Berwig tried to keep in step with them. Twice, he adjusted his hop, only to stumble. Each time he almost fell, bringing a gasp from some of the onlookers, snorts from others. Managing to right himself, he continued on. When Berg came to the Settop, he halted, puffing up his cheeks, stroking his whiskers, while trying to conceal an occasional scratch. He tried to look as ferocious as possible. Directly behind the Settop were the four musicians with sounders, which made a sound not unlike the braying of elk. As soon as Berwig took his position, they lifted them to their lips and began to blow. Berwig waited impatiently. When the music was over, Berwig lifted the proclamation and paused, so trembling the bark fairly rattled. "As your grantor," he began, "it's my obligation to bring you, important news, and the news is actually bad. I have learned that the Felparts, because of the bad weather, have unable to restrain himself," he scratched his neck, "come on our territory." There was an angry murmur from the crowd. "As your grantor, the peerless power in our land, you can be sure that I'll, lead my invincible warriors to, repel every attack. Moreover, when I, along with mighty warriors, have beaten them back, I'll advance upon them and destroy them a lot and take back all the lands they, took from us. Me." The monomers in the hall stared intently at Berwig. A few rolled their eyes. "But, unfortunately," Berwig continued, "I must also tell you that there are some monomers who are aiding our enemies." "No, not possible," was heard from the crowd. "As you know, my mother, the sainted Jolaine of recent memory, was murdered by Perloo. He was helped by Lucabara. These two, through some bad treachery, escaped from the central tribe burrow, and actually, I think they've gone, over to the Felbart side." He scratched his nose. Woo! Excuse me. "If you have any doubts about Perloo, I'll share Jolaine's last proclamation. Listen to what she thought of Perloo." Woo! Excuse me. You just get that tickle in your throat. Is it the voice? Clearing his throat, Berwig read the written proclamation. The reaction of the crowd was mixed. Some expressed anger. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Most simply took in the news as if not sure what to do or say. Berwig looked around and said, "You are all free to inspect this document. I'll have someone fix it to the wall. Is there any other questions?" he asked. "Does anyone wish to defend Perloo? Anyone want to question this document or say anything?" A young monomer by the name of Whitbo hopped out of the crowd. "How do we know that Jolaine's proclamation is real?" he called. The boldness of the question was surprised Berwick. He could do little more than gawk at the fellow. His trembling increased. His itchiness became awful. It was Cineas who took action. He jumped forward and stared up at Quidpo. Is it possible that you're calling Granter Berwig a liar? He hissed. No, not at all, Quidpo said. I'm merely asking, are you defending Perloo? Cineas interrupted, his voice rising to a shriek. Supporting the Felbots? Encouraging our enemies, defending traitors? Well, of course not. It's just... Cineas whirled about. Arrest this traitor, he cried to the military commander. Quickly! The commander and two warriors hopped forward, and before the protester could say another word, he was dragged from the great hall crying, I was only asking a... The door slammed on him. It all happened so quickly, none of the onlookers in the hall did a thing. Cineas bowed low before Berwig. Did you wish to say anything more, oh Granta? Me? No. A thoroughly rattled Berwig replied. That's fine, I'm done. From the back of the hall, Grumple cried out, Death to Perloo! Death to all traitors! Slowly but surely the cry was taken up by others. Berwig snorted with relief. He told himself, really wonderful and brave. Full of himself, he hopped out of the hall. The crowd, buzzing with excitement, gathered around the posted proclamation. In the middle of the crowd was Gumple. How curious, she said to herself after reading the proclamation a few times. It denounces Perloo, but says nothing about who is to become the new grantor. For a long time, Gumple stared at the proclamation. The more she looked at it, the more certain she saw a jagged seam running the length of the proclamation. 2 sheets, she concluded, glued. I wonder where the other half is. Oh, and what it said. Quitting the great hall, Gumple hopped to Berwig's room. The grantor, recovering from his ordeal, was on his bed eating. How did I sound? He asked. Thrilling. I thought so, Berwig agreed. Well, what do you want? Will you be leading your army against the Felbots? I suppose I have to, Berwig replied. Oh. May I, Gumble mumbled, suggest something? If you must. Let Sidious march at the head of the army. Berwick squinted at Grumple. That's the grantor's place, he growled. I suppose, returned Gumple with a yawn and a few blinks of her bleary eyes. Of course, it is the most dangerous spot. Berwick stared at the creature before him. Then he suddenly sucked in his breath. You know, it might be a good thing to put Cineas up front. It might teach him a lesson. How clever of me to think of that. Suddenly he frowned. But who would remain in charge here? Oh, well, Gumple replied as if the question had never occurred to her. Perhaps me? Aha! Oh! Okay. That was a pretty good chapter. Let's see what Berwig's next moves are. I mean, if Gumple can see that it's not a whole sheet, then I'm sure others can too. I kind of forgot her voice. I think I nailed it though. Anyways, yeah. So everyone's just trying to take the throne, basically. It's like Game of Thrones with rabbits. And but yeah, no, it's a good story so far. It's getting towards the end, so I think it'll probably climax with the Felbarts and everyone, and everything's at stake, and somehow Perloo probably steps up and becomes the hero because you know what? He's bold. So that's gonna be my guess, especially if everyone's at war and stuff. So we'll see what happens. on the next reading of Perloo, the Bold by ABI. Okay, have a good one. Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you liked it. If not, that's okay. You know, I'm just doing this for me, for fun. So I don't even care. That's why I don't edit it or anything. Just record, post, whatever. Done.